Welcome back to Relics of Time. Today, we travel back to a world before books, before alphabets, before roads, before history was written down. A world where the greatest ideas of humanity had not yet been born. No letters. No recorded laws. No written myths. No wheels turning beneath carts. No written memory that could outlive a human life. And yet, in the hot lands between two rivers, in the ancient world of Mesopotamia, something extraordinary began. A revolution so quiet that no one living through it could have known how deeply it would shape the future, because here, in the land of Sumer, humanity created two of the most powerful inventions in all of history: the first writing system and the wheel. Two ideas so simple and so profound that they would transform civilization forever. One gave humanity a way to preserve thought, the other gave humanity a way to multiply movement. One expanded memory, the other expanded power, and together, they helped create the world we still live in today. If you enjoy ancient history, lost civilizations, myths, and the great inventions of the past, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment. And now, let us return to the beginning. Long before writing, human beings already spoke, remembered, traded, counted, built, and worshipped. They told stories around fires, they passed knowledge from parent to child. They remembered debts, they remembered promises, they remembered names. But memory has a family can remember its own story. A village can remember its customs. But what happens when a village becomes a town, and a town becomes a city? What happens when fields expand, when grain is stored, when herds multiply, when temples collect offerings, when workers must be paid, when land must be managed, when trade becomes too complex for the human mind alone? That is where the story truly begins. Because writing was not born from poetry. It was not born from philosophy. It was not born because people wanted to tell beautiful stories. Writing was born because civilization had become too complicated to remember. In southern Mesopotamia, between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, the first great cities began to rise: Uruk, Urs, Eridu, Lagash. These were not simple settlements, they were living systems. Fields stretched beyond the city walls, canals carried water across the dry land. Temples stood at the center of power, workers labored, craftsmen produced goods, merchants moved resources, priests managed offerings, administrators counted what entered, and what left. To grain had to be measured, oil had to be tracked, animals had to be counted, rations had to be distributed, land had to be assigned, labor had to be organized, and suddenly, memory was no longer enough. This is one of the great truths of history: when society grows more complex, it demands new tools, and so, before writing itself, there came something smaller, something humble, something almost invisible in the grand story of civilization: tiny clay tokens, small objects made of clay, simple in shape. Some were round, some were cone-shaped, some looked like discs, some like cylinders, some like each shape could represent something. A sheep, a jar of oil, a measure of grain, a quantity of goods. This was not writing yet, but it was the beginning of symbolic thought, because for the first time, humans created an object that did not matter for what it was, but for what it represented. Not the sheep itself, but a symbol for the sheep; not the grain itself, but a token standing in its place. This is a profound mental leap, because once a thing can be replaced by a symbol, the road to writing has already begun. These clay tokens were practical. If grain was delivered to a temple, the transaction could be represented. If animals were counted, the numbers could be tracked. If laborers were owed rations, their portions could be recorded through symbols, simple or efficient, but only for a while, because as cities grew, the number of transactions grew with them, and complexity always creates pressure. The more goods there were, the more tokens there were, the more tokens there were, the harder they became to. How do you transport them securely? How do you prove what was delivered? How do you prevent fraud? How do you preserve a transaction in a trustworthy form? And this is where another brilliant idea appeared: clay envelopes. Imagine a hollow clay ball or sealed container. The tokens representing a transaction were placed inside, then the clay was sealed. Inside the sealed object was the evidence, a protected record, a primitive contract. If there was a dispute, the clay could be broken open, but that created another problem. If you had to break the object to verify its contents, you destroyed the record itself. So someone had an idea, a simple idea, a revolutionary idea. What if the contents were marked on the outside? What if the symbols inside were pressed into the wet clay before it dried? That way, the record could be read without being broken. And this is one of the most important moments in human history, because at that point, the physical token inside begins to matter less than the mark on the surface. The object becomes less important than the symbol, and eventually, the tokens inside are no longer necessary at all. Only the marks remain, only the signs, only the record. That is the birth of writing, not in a dramatic flash, not in a single moment of genius, but in a gradual transition, from object, to symbol, to impression, to inscription. At first, these early signs were simple. They were pictographic, they looked more like images than true writing. A container could be represented by a simplified drawing of a container. Grain could be shown as a recognizable symbol. Animals, tools, offerings, people, and goods all had visual forms. This early system was direct, practical, logical. If you wanted to record grain, you made a sign for grain. If you wanted to record a vessel, you made a sign for a vessel. If you wanted to record a person or a place, you created a mark that stood for it. These earliest records were not literature. They were not stories, they were not myths, they were accounting, inventories, rations, temple administration, and that is one of the most fascinating facts of all. One of the greatest cultural technologies in history was born from bookkeeping, from the need to control resources, from the need to create order, from the need to manage power. But civilization never stays only practical. Once a system exists, humans always expanded. First, you record goods, then you record names, then places, then titles, then offerings, then land, then rulers, then events, and eventually, you begin recording not only things, but thought. This is the second great revolution, because there is a vast difference between a sign that means grain and a sign that can help represent sound, language, meaning, and abstraction. That is the moment when writing stops being only a tool of accounting and becomes a tool of civilization. The signs themselves also changed. At first, they may have looked more pictorial, but over time, practicality won. If you must write every day, if you must record hundreds of transactions, if you must train administrators, you do not want to draw detailed pictures. You want speed, you want consistency, you want efficiency, and the writing surface shaped the writing itself. This is crucial, because the first great writing system was not created on paper, not on parchment, not with ink. It was created in clay, soft, wet clay, and the tool used to write was often a reed stylus. When pressed into clay, a reed stylus does not create a smooth flowing line. It creates an impression. A wedge-shaped mark. A small triangular indentation. One wedge, then another, and from combinations of these wedge-shaped impressions, the signs evolved. That is why we call it cuneiform, from the Latin word for wedge. Cuneiform was not designed to look artistic. It looked the way it did because the material demanded it. Clay, reed, pressure, repetition. The physical process shaped the form of thought. This is how real technologies are born, not only from ideas, but from the meeting of idea, tool, hand, and material. And while writing was evolving in this world, Another revolution was beginning, not in language, but in movement, not in memory, but in mechanics, the wheel. Today, the wheel seems so ordinary that it is almost invisible to us. We see it everywhere. On cars, on bicycles, on carts, on machines, in gears, in engines, in devices so common we rarely think about them. But there was once a time when it did not exist. Imagine a world without wheels. Every load is carried by hand, dragged across the ground, pulled on sledges, moved by brute force. Or transported by water, when possible, that can work in small communities. But when cities begin to grow, when clay must be moved, when grain must be transported, when wood, stone, jars, and tools must travel, the pressure builds again, and pressure creates invention. One of the earliest and most important rotational technologies was likely not the transport wheel first, but the potter's wheel. A rotating platform. A deceptively simple machine. When a vessel rotates, a potter can shape it more evenly, more quickly, and with greater control. This is more than a convenience. It is a new way of thinking. The object no longer remains still while the human works around it. Now the object moves. Rotation becomes useful, repeatable, systematic. A principle has been discovered. Circular motion can save labor. It can increase precision. It can increase production, and in a civilization already dependent on storage, containers, trade, and craft, that matters enormously. This is why many historians see the potter's wheel as a crucial conceptual step, not necessarily the same thing as a cartwheel in its earliest form, but a related breakthrough with a realization that controlled rotation can become technology, and once that principle enters transport, the world changes forever. The earliest wheeled vehicles were likely heavy, solid, crude, massive wooden constructions, not elegant, not fast, but transformative. A load that once required many people straining against the earth could now move differently, not effortlessly, but with a new logic, rolling instead of dragging. This is one of the deepest patterns in technological history. The greatest inventions often do not eliminate effort, they change the kind of effort, and that changes everything. Like writing, the wheel did not appear in a single magical instant. It was not one isolated flash of genius. It was a chain of observations, materials, craft knowledge, experimentation, wood, axles, balance, weight, rotation, connection, and above all, understanding. The understanding that a circular object, properly mounted, can transform movement. This is as profound as writing itself, because both inventions are, at their core, acts of abstraction. Writing says a symbol can stand for a thing, the wheel says rotation can replace brute force. That is civilization, not just intelligence, not just survival, but the ability to transform observation into a repeatable system. A tool. A principle. A technology that can outlive its creators by thousands of. And when we look at Sumer, that is exactly what we see, not a single miracle, but a network of connected innovations, cities, canals, temples, administration, writing, the wheel, craft, specialization, trade, myth, law, power, all of it connected, because writing and the wheel are not separate stories, they are twin answers to the same problem. How do humans overcome their limits? Memory is limited. Writing extends it, the body is limited, the wheel multiplies it. That is the genius of this age. Point 2 Inventions. Point 2 Solutions, and from them, an entirely new world emerges. As writing matured, it became more than a record of grain and oil. It began to preserve names, titles, offerings, rituals, property, authority. Then something even greater happened. Writing began to preserve stories. This may be the moment when civilization becomes truly immortal. Because an inventory matters for a day. A ration list matters for a week. A tax record matters for a season. But a story can survive millennia. Before writing, stories lived only in voices, told by elders, repeated in temples, passed between generations. But oral memory changes, words shift, details fade, names disappear. With writing, the voice of the past can remain not perfectly, not forever, but far longer than memory alone could ever allow, and that is why today, we know these people existed, that is why we know the names of cities, why we know the names of kings. Why we know the names of gods, why we can still hear echoes of their fears, hopes, rituals, ambitions, and beliefs, and this is where the story becomes almost poetic, because without cuneiform, many of the great stories of Mesopotamia would have vanished, among them, the story of Gilgamesh. A king who sought immortality. A legend who feared death. A ruler whose story crossed the boundary between history and myth, and in a strange way, writing gave him exactly what he sought, not bodily immortality, not eternal flesh, but narrative immortality. His body vanished into dust, his city changed, his age ended, but his story survived, pressed into clay, carried across time. That is the power of writing. It does not merely record civilization, it allows civilization to speak across thousands of years. As writing became more important, those who mastered it became powerful. Scribes. In our modern world, literacy is almost ordinary, but in ancient Sumer, it was elite knowledge. A scribe was not merely someone who could write. A scribe was a keeper of memory. A manager of truth. A servant of administration. A recorder of offerings. A witness to agreements. A guardian of law. A transmitter of authority. Scribes became essential to temples, cities, and rulers, and because writing was complex, they had to be trained. Schools emerged, not gentle schools in the modern sense, but rigorous places of discipline. A student sat with clay tablets, copied signs of again and again and again. One sign, another sign, then many more. Cuneiform was not a simple alphabet, it was a demanding system. To master it required memory, precision, repetition, and patience. That difficulty made the scribe valuable, and that value made writing central to power. Because once a state can record, it can organize. Once it can organize, it can expand. Once it can expand, it can endure. And while writing transformed memory, the will transformed the physical life of civilization. The will did not remain only in the potter's workshop. It entered transport, trade, agriculture, construction, movement of materials, and eventually, war. At first, wheeled vehicles likely carried goods, grain, clay, wood, stone, jars, supplies, but over time, like so many technologies, their uses multiplied. A technology that improves transport can also improve logistics. A technology that improves logistics can also improve administration, and a technology that improves administration can also strengthen armies. The same is true of writing. Writing can preserve a hymn, but it can also record taxes. It can preserve a myth, but it can also issue commands. It can protect memory, but it can also enforce power. The same with the wheel. It can carry food, but it can also carry weapons. It can help the farmer, but it can also serve the state. This is one of the deepest truths about civilization. Technology rarely remains innocent. Once a tool exists, society finds many ways to use it, some beautiful, some brutal, some sacred, some political, and that is exactly what happened in the ancient world. The will helped build. It helped move. It helped expand. It helped connect. It helped conquer. Writing helped remember. It helped calculate. It helped preserve. It helped command. It helped legitimize power. Together, they accelerated civilization, not overnight, not explosively in the modern sense, but irreversibly. More goods could move farther, more resources could be managed, more people could be organized, more knowledge could be preserved, larger systems could survive. That is the real story here. Writing and the wheel were not random inventions, they were answers to the growing complexity of urban life. They emerged because civilization itself demanded them. The world had become too large for memory alone. So writing emerged. The world had become too heavy for muscle alone. So the wheel emerged. That is why Sumer matters so much, not just because it was ancient, not just because it was first, But because it was foundational, IT was one of the places where humanity learned how to think in systems, how to create tools not just for survival, but for structure, for continuity, for scale, for legacy. When we think of ancient Sumer, we should not think only of ruins, not only of temples, not only of kings, not only of myth. We should think of principles, the principle that thought can be stored, the principle that movement can be multiplied, the principle that complexity demands innovation, the principle that human limits can be extended, and if you look closely, that same pattern still defines our world. When the world becomes too complex, we invent new ways to remember it. When the world becomes too heavy, we invent new ways to move through it. That is what humans do, that is what we have always done, from clay tablets to libraries, or from reed styluses to digital text, from the potter's wheel to engines, gears, and machines, up from a heavy wooden cart to entire transportation systems. All of it echoes back to those early moments. To wet clay. To the pressure of a hand. To the turning of a circular form. To the silent logic of a city that needed order. And perhaps that is why the ancient world still fascinates us so deeply, because it reminds us that the foundations of our modern life were not built all at once, they were built slowly, through need, through pressure, through experimentation, through ordinary problems that led to extraordinary ideas. The first writing did not begin as literature, the wheel did not begin as grand engineering, both began in practical necessity. And that may be the most powerful lesson of all. A civilization is not always born in moments of glory. Sometimes it is born in the need to count grain, in the need to seal a record, in the need to shape a clay vessel, in the need to move a heavy load. And from those simple needs emerge inventions that outlive empires. That is why the story of writing and the wheel is not just a story about the past. It is a story about the human mind, about how we respond when the old ways are no longer enough, about how we turn limits into systems, about how we transform survival into civilization. So this is how the first writing was born. This is how cuneiform emerged from symbols, clay, and administration. This is how the wheel emerged from rotation, craft, and the logic of movement, not as isolated miracles, but as answers. Answers created by a world becoming more complex than ever before, and from those answers, history itself began to move. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment. Tell me in the comments, which ancient invention fascinates you the most? Was it writing, the wheel, or something else entirely? And if you want to continue exploring the forgotten wonders of ancient civilizations, join me in the next episode of Relics of Time. Because the past is not silent, it is still speaking to us. We just have to know how to listen.